Good afternoon, and welcome to the latest in ICCR's Just Transition webinar series. Our session today will focus on lifting up worker and community voices to make ESG commitments real. And we have some wonderful speakers to talk with us about this important work. My name is Christina Herman, and I coordinate investor work on the climate crisis at the Interfaith Center on Corporate Responsibility. ICCR is a coalition of some 300 global faith and values-based institutional investors that work together to engage the world's largest corporations on a broad range of social and environmental issues affecting communities in the US and abroad. We feel strongly that justice must be at the heart of the societal changes needed to address the climate crisis, and are working to explore ways that we can collectively ensure a just transition as we shift to a clean energy economy. So I welcome everyone today to this webinar. To make the massive shifts needed with the urgency required, ICCR members understand that the transition to a clean energy economy must be both just and equitable, and that those affected, particularly the most vulnerable, must be part of the process of change. Because listening to communities and groups affected by the transition is central to the way we want to do our work, I am delighted to introduce Valerie Boucard, a senior program associate with the Nathan Cummings Foundation, whose work is focused on partnership with frontline communities and environmental justice groups working for a just and sustainable and equitable economy. Valerie has been with Nathan Cummings for 6 years and currently leads the foundation's climate and environmental related grant making through the Inclusive Clean Economy program. She supports their corporate and political accountability program and shareholder engagement on climate and energy in partnership with the racial and economic justice team. Valerie will offer a few introductory remarks to provide additional context, help frame our conversation, and introduce our speakers. I want to thank the presenters in advance for their willingness to share their perspectives and expertise with us today. All speakers have offered to make their emails available for follow-up questions, and their contact information will be available in a slide at the close of this webinar. Before I turn the webinar over to Valerie, I want to offer a few housekeeping points. This webinar is being recorded, and everyone will receive a follow-up email with a link to the recording and of course the contact emails for the speakers. You will be in listen-only mode throughout the webinar. We will hear from each of our speakers, each for about 15 minutes, and then we'll have about 20 to 25 minutes after the presentation for questions. So please put your questions in the question box. It's the little Q&A box on your control panel. Please do not put your questions in the chat box, but feel free to share information there. So now I'll hand the webinar over to Valerie, who will get us started. Thanks, Valerie.
Thank you, Christina, and thank you all for joining us today. I'm going to take actually just a few minutes to share some context and framing for our time today. My grant-making work at the Nathan Cummings Foundation is focused on advancing a just transition to an inclusive, clean economy that works for all. As an investor, we've been engaged in active ownership strategies and shareholder engagement for more than 18 years. And over the past 2, we've been exploring how to meaningfully partner with our grantees and communities on the ground to integrate their needs and the impacts they face into our engagement strategy with companies. The reason for that is so that our shareholder work is more inclusive, informed, and shaped by those closest and most impacted by the issues we seek to address. We've also been learning and thinking through what meaningful engagement looks like. Because for NCF, shareholder engagement is really just one of the tools that we use to advance our broader goals. So a key question for us is, how can this tool support the work of organizations and communities on the ground as they work to shift from an extractive to a clean energy economy? It's important to note that just transition means different things to different people. Historically, it's centered on labor, protecting workers to ensure that there are job opportunities in the renewable energy economy that provide retraining, living wages, and health and safety benefits. And that's critically important. But at the same time, organizations and communities are building on decades of advocacy and organizing work in environmental and climate justice. They're lifting up a powerful vision for an economy that works for all, a just transition that's rooted in the lived experience of frontline communities, and understands that climate change, racial, and economic justice are inextricably linked. There's often tension between labor and community groups in this context. Workers naturally want to preserve good jobs while communities may be fighting to shut down facilities that impact their health, air, water, soil, their very lives in places where they live and work. We have an amazing group of speakers with us today who are going to share a more expansive understanding of what just transition can look like in practice, and also share some examples of what meaningful engagement looks like when we bring labor and communities together. We're joined by Jay Mehta, senior researcher and campaigner with Jobs to Move America, which works to transform public spending and corporate behavior using a comprehensive approach rooted in racial and economic justice and community organizing. Jay brings over a decade of experience with strategic research and campaigns, including drafting and passing labor policies and conducting community and political organizing. It's important to note here, NCF supports Jobs to Move America as a powerful example of what just transition looks like on the ground. Their work with companies, labor, community, and local governments helps to ensure that clean manufacturing companies use the power of public funds to create public good, fostering the conditions for an inclusive democracy, equitable economy, and a healthy environment. We're also joined by Rob Four, who will share some investor perspectives on just transition, examples of engagement with communities being affected by environmental racism, what that process has looked like, and how it's shaped his engagement with companies. Rob is the Director of Faith-Based Investing and Corporate Engagement for the Presbyterian Church of USA, where he's been on the national staff for 12 years in a variety of roles, and also serves as a lead staff person for the Committee on Mission Responsibility through Investment. And that's a committee charged with advancing the church's mission goals through its invested capital. Jay also currently serves on ICCR's board of directors, and I am thrilled to have both of them on this panel and part of this conversation today. So with that, I will turn it over to Jay.
Thank you so much, Valerie, Christina, and Rob, for allowing me to be here today and present. I wanted to give a little bit of time to just talk about JMA, the work we do, and the context investor shareholder work, our kind of entry into this type of work, and using it as a tool for organizing. Next slide. Jobs to Move America, our organization, is a nonprofit strategic policy organization. We're seeking an economy where public goods, by way of procurements, are able to do the most public good, and understand that our public dollars are our most powerful tool to shape a better future for workers. We combine strategic research, policy advocacy, and organizing to harness the power of our public dollars to create good jobs, healthy communities across the country. Some of this focuses on strictly on policy, which could be good jobs policy, climate justice, transparency, and sunshine, as well as workforce development, equity programs, and just as importantly, community benefits agreements. Next slide. Why focusing on public purchasing? Approximately 20% of manufacturers' goods are purchased by our governments and public agencies. Local, state, and federal agencies spend $2 trillion of our public dollars on manufactured goods. And the research has shown that $2 trillion we spend on public purchasing each year could create up to 20 million good jobs if cities and states embrace this model of public goods for the most public good. We have primarily focused a lot of our work, initial work, on transit agencies, is understanding that that $2 trillion includes everything from rail and bus manufacturing, garbage trucks, school buses, other manufactured goods. Next slide. We've, one of our signature tools, policy tools, is called the U.S. Employment Plan, which we work very closely with foundation institutions and the Department of Transportation under the Obama administration to come up with a policy tool that can be implemented by putting into a procurement or proposal. That tool would allow a manufacturer who's bidding on a multi-million-dollar, billion-dollar contract to say, these are the type of jobs we're providing, these are the number of jobs, these are the training opportunities, these are the other benefits. Those benefits could also include an agreement to a community benefits agreement with a lot more workers and allies at the table. We've successfully included this U.S. employment plan process in procurement contracts with Los Angeles Metro, Chicago Transit, and NYC MTA. Currently working on an active program for New Jersey and New Jersey Transit as well, in conjunction with our environmental justice partners in both states. Part of our work in progress is also 6 active coalitions, heavy in faith, labor, environmental justice, and workforce development in 6 states. Very excited about that work as well. Some of the examples of our work and the work on community-led success involve electric bus manufacturer Proterra, which recently agreed to workforce development, including a union contract, increased training of development of highly skilled workforce with good union quality jobs. Likewise, BYD was the first electric manufacturer to sign a CBA back in 2017. They recently renewed their CBA, which has provided training, apprenticeships, and good union jobs from populations facing significant barriers to employment, including people of color, veterans, and returning citizens. It's important to note that both of these things happened in October of this year, and builds on work that we've already conducted in California and other states over the course of many years, working on this U.S. employment plan policy. Next slide. So we are, in thinking about this, our work traditionally hasn't been to engage with investors or shareholders. But as we mentioned, some of these public goods and the procurement and the contracts go to public companies. Public companies in our, very initial research, we're not experts in this arena, like we see them increasingly touting ESG principles, but sometimes offer little evidence of accountability and compliance. Public companies, while touting ESG, may engage in public business practices, which include reducing unionized workforces, shifting production to right to work or lower wage regions. And stakeholders, including investors, as we see it, can play a role in demanding ESG promises and accountability measures be implemented. Next slide. Sorry, one second. I might have had the, I'll give you a little bit of, of the background on New Flyer. Do you see this, the background New Flyer slide? So, our initial work started by engaging with a bus manufacturer called New Flyer, the NFI group. It's a multi-billion-dollar group, Canadian public company, the largest bus manufacturer in North America, and it's very active in the international market, including the UK and Asia. It generates 70% of their revenue from public contracts for transit and procurement agencies, and potentially more in 2021 and beyond, with the drop right now in private coach demand. It's also a company that promotes itself as an ESG-friendly company. Through many years of engagement, we realized that we don't see NFI operating in good faith. We see them expanding their non-union presence in right-to-work states like Kentucky and Alabama, while they're based out of Winnipeg in Canada, a unionized facility, and have a unionized facility in Minnesota. The places where they're expanding, the places where they're trying to have a bigger presence are certainly right-to-work states, and states which have potentially less protection for workers. In 2019, Alabama A&M study, initial study, and as part of our work also doing community surveys, results included numerous complaints alleging race-based discrimination, sexual harassment, and fear of retaliation for speaking up problems at work, including health and safety concerns. This based in the Anniston, Alabama plant. African-American survey respondents were twice as likely to say that, as far as they knew, discrimination was a big problem in their workplace. Surveyed workers reported being denied promotions, feeling isolated, receiving less support from management, and being treated as if they were incompetent because of their race. Anniston survey respondents also reported retaliation for or speaking about problems at work. This includes being assigned too much work or hazardous work. Survey workers also reported long hours, having little control of their schedules, experiencing a significant mandatory overtime, and had concerns about safety of their workplaces. 15% of the survey respondents in the AAMU report reported being seriously injured on the job, and 2 reported filing complaints about dangerous working conditions. This is an ongoing study in Alabama. This is also part of our ongoing research and work into understanding what's happening with these facilities and the actions they're taking and the disparities between unionized facilities and non-unionized facilities. In this engagement, we've really tried to reach out to NFI to figure out how to sign a national community benefits agreement, how to work with our Alabama coalition on implementing training, equity programs, expanding opportunities, and have been rebuffed. NFI has also responded to our general engagement by hiring an inexperienced consulting group to astroturf our efforts in the community and JMA. Next slide. So I wanted to just open it up with that initial conversation on kind of why we're engaging now on what we're calling capital strategies, investor shareholder work. We really launched it back in March when we realized that the company we felt had a very lackluster COVID response, depending on the facility, whether it's a unionized facility in the north or the hardships that we're experiencing for workers in the south. We wrote a letter to the board prior to the shareholder meeting, asking them to mitigate certain concerns and address them, and we felt what we received as a kind of a standard reply. The company has taken it upon itself in about a year ago, MLK Day last year, they announced a community benefits framework, again, mimicking language about community benefits agreements and saying the right things, but having no accountability or enforceability mechanism to actually hold them to these promises. We've also, in some of our shareholder work and through Nathan's Cummings Foundation, through ICCR, through these other conversations, we've engaged also with the Van City Investment in Canada. I've begun some outreach ideas, including letters, shareholder proposals, other efforts. But again, we're still fairly new in this arena. And that's why I think expanding our presence, our ability to engage with the larger socially responsible investment community is going to be very important for us in 2021 and moving forward. We have a series of efforts from on the ground, community organizing, looking at federal policy, looking at state policy, engaging with transit agencies, and trying to do this work broadly. But our work will continue, certainly with the New Flyer group, in trying to get them to the table for what could be of benefit to the company in terms of long-term engagement and their work with transit agencies. I'll leave it at that. I just wanted to give that overview, and I'm happy to answer any other questions during that period. Also don't want to take too much time. We're okay.
Thank you, Jay. We're going to turn it over to Rob.
Thank you, Valerie. Can you all see my screen? Looks like it's going. You can?
Yep, looks good.
Great. Well, thank you again, Jay. Thanks for that. And Valerie, thank you for the introduction. Great to be with you all here today. I was wanting to talk with you all a little bit about some of the experiences that our Responsible Investment Committee, called the Committee on Responsibility Through Investment, had in 2019 doing community engagements, and I kind of want to go over kind of what the impetus was for that, and how we structured those engagements and how we are trying to incorporate those into our work of shareholder advocacy and corporate engagement. So just to start off a little bit, as Valerie mentioned, I'm the lead staff person to the Presbyterian Church's Responsible Investment Committee. And what that committee does is really the kind of policy implementation and advocacy arm of the General Assembly of the Presbyterian Church. And we work with the companies that are held in the portfolios of our two investing agencies, our foundation and our pension board. Move to the next slide here. Okay. And just to give a little more color about how we are organized, we in this space, our committee is made of 12 members that are all elected by our General Assembly, our highest governing body. And it brings together members who sit on the board of our investing agencies, our pension fund, our foundation, as well as our mission board, as well as 3 advocacy committees. And this was kind of embedded in the intentionality of the structure of our committee to bring together the investing agencies and those who are doing more advocacy work and mission work on behalf of the church to implement and make recommendations for responsible investing policy. This constitutes, we all represent kind of the national expression of the Presbyterian Church USA. And the Presbyterian Church USA, like a lot of other Christian denominations in the US, is organized at the national level, the regional level through middle judicatories, we call them presbyteries, and then at the course of the local level through congregations. Wanted to share with you all our impetus into this work by sharing 2 directives we received from our General Assembly in 2018. The first of which was a directive that was given to the entire Presbyterian Church, which had to do with environmental racism. And the key points of that directive were to prioritize listening to the perspectives and voices of people most impacted by environmental racism. And then again to really listen and to lift up and engage those issues. How we are defining, how our church defines environmental racism, I've included right here, and it has a lot to do with the disproportionate burden of environmental problems that affect people of color. And you can see those enumerated right there. So that was kind of our guiding kind of directive. And we received also another directive from our General Assembly that was directed to our committee, which I will I'll bring up here to highlight a little bit later. Which we had developed a policy or an evaluation framework to evaluate companies based on environmental, social, and governance standards that we use to kind of look at companies that are named by our General Assembly for focused engagement. As you can see, there were 9 companies named. And if the companies are not moving towards compliance with that, we could come back at a subsequent General Assembly and recommend possible selective divestment. So those are the 2 directives. So then we started thinking about, our committee started thinking about wanting to do these community engagements and what that would look like to engage on environmental racism, climate change issues. So our committee appointed a task force to really undertake this work and to guide that work. And here are the basic principles that we came up with, and this was all in kind of the fall of 2018, about 2 years ago. And we came up with these to identify existing relationships, engage through local partnerships, listen, learn, and be led by the communities, and commit to follow up. And I think it's important to say that we really wanted to try to be intentional about this work and do it in a way that was going to be respectful, productive, and helpful. So for us, that meant identifying existing relationships. We connected with the regional leaders in South Louisiana, as well as in Detroit and Flint, Michigan areas. And we told them that we were wanting to meet with communities and meet with local leaders who were working on environmental and climate change issues as it related to vulnerable communities, traditionally communities of color. And we sought recommendations from those regional leaders. We then were able to get connected with local Presbyterians who were already partnering with local communities on these issues. And we were able to get conversations with them and share with them our hopes and our goals. And they were able to get us invited to partner with them along the work that they were already doing in these communities. And we set up engagements in March of 2019 and June of 2019. I'll talk a little bit about the first engagement in South Louisiana. We went down we flew to New Orleans and did 2 trips. One day we went to visit the Pointe-à-Chien Indian tribe, which is about an hour and a half southwest of New Orleans. And we met with leaders of this tribe that are dealing with problems of coastal erosion and as related to rising seas and as caused by climate change. They're really, this group, you may have read about them. They've been referred to sometimes as maybe some of the first climate change refugees in America, because there's a debate about whether and how to relocate their entire community. Although they don't want that, they want to stay in their communities. But I'll talk about that in a minute. And then they also mentioned just the challenges they had, especially at the local and state level, for addressing their issues. And as you can see in this photo, we were actually on a boat riding around in land that could be walked on 5 years ago. And this is part of their ancestral land, in which they're losing about a football field's worth of land per day to coastal erosion. Next, we went to Plaquemines Parish, which is about an hour east of New Orleans, and met with Reverend Tyrone Edwards, who's pictured here, and met with him and his community at the Zion Travelers Cooperative Center in Plaquemines Parish. And Reverend Edwards talked to us about the impact of flooding, which happens in their community. Now it used to take a Category 1 or so hurricane to really impact them. Now things have gotten so dire that really just a heavy tropical storm or heavy rain will flood their community. So they're building, trying to develop resilient structures in their community, as well as train their youth for really jobs that will help them in their efforts to stay on their land and build their economy. As you can see here, there was they took us to show us their local oyster industry, which has been decimated by coastal erosion. In June of 2019, we went to Detroit and Flint, Michigan. We went to Flint, Michigan, and really worked with the Presbyterian Church has a disaster assistance program, which has a kind of a documentary filmmaking arm. And one of our colleagues had made a 4-year project developing a documentary about the water issue in Flint, and called Flint, the Poison of American City. I believe it's available on Amazon if you're interested. It's very, very powerful film. And we met with local leaders who were featured in the documentary and talked to them about the various issues surrounding that event. And then we went to Detroit, Southwest Detroit, and met with representatives from Michigan United. Pictured here is Emma Lockridge, who is really a kind of the face of an engagement with Marathon Petroleum, and talking about their operations, which have really negatively impacted her community, her neighborhood. And as we learned about the daily pollution and the health problems that were caused by the operations from this refinery, which is very close to her neighborhood, and her effort to to try to engage with the company to get the company to buy out their homes, basically at a fair market rate, which the company had done a number of years prior to a predominantly white community, which is on the other side of the refinery. So going back to our principles, that third principle, the listen, learn, and be led, we really wanted to listen to these communities, learn from them, and be led by them. So in South Louisiana, we really learned from both communities that corporate lobbying and spending in local and state elections posed the most serious problem for the community. They didn't name corporations as directly the problem, but they did have a very acute understanding that the corporations that really fund the campaigns of local and state legislators is a problem. So that was very important to learn that. In Flint, we really talked about that there was some, but we didn't get into too much direct corporate responsibility for their issue. However, they did talk a lot about the impact on the community when General Motors left Flint. And it helped us think about what responsibility does a corporation have for when it leaves a community that it's operated in, and what in the kind of the ensuing economic devastation that can happen, which did happen in Flint. And then with the community in Detroit, we talked about a specific issue with a particular corporation, and that corporation happened to be one that we were attempting to engage at the time. It was named by our General Assembly to engage, and we again wanted to take the lead with, or take the listen to the lead of the folks from Michigan United and Emma on how if we could help, and if so, how. Finally, our principles of commitment to follow up, or make a commitment to follow up. So we've tried to stay in touch with with these communities. We've been most engaged with Emma Lockridge and her ongoing engagement with Marathon Petroleum. However, we have made plans to in 2021 seek to reconnect with the communities in South Louisiana. Secondly, to seek ways to incorporate these learnings into our corporate engagements, which we have have already started to do in some ways. This a part of the reason we were so eager to join the ICCR's climate lobbying campaign was for a lot of what we heard in South Louisiana, and have actually filed a shareholder proposal with Entergy, which is a utility that is located in New Orleans, and have ongoing dialogues with them. And then lastly, we sought to institutionalize these learnings through our evaluation metrics framework. And that is our metrics policy framework, and that's intentionally illegible because I just want to show you how it kind of looks. It has about 53 criteria and or sub-criteria. And here's one of the ways that we attempted to incorporate our learnings into the social section, and we gave it the highest priority weight for our weightings. And you can see kind of these three areas, these three criteria that have to do with a corporation's impact, or if their operations negatively impact the local communities and historically communities of color. So the kind of in conclusion here, I just want to say a few things that this work is not easy to do. We found it to be very challenging, especially in doing it the way that we wanted to do it, with a lot of intentionality. It was very time intensive, and saying that, our committee really believes that, just because it's hard doesn't mean we shouldn't do it, and we need to continue to find ways to do it and do it better. We are, definitely still learning from our experiences, and it's an ongoing process. But some of the questions that we're continuing to try to wrestle with is, as investors, what can we do to continue to do this work, and especially as we do more and more work on just transition issues in the future, how do we really hear and engage with the people that are being most affected on the ground? and how do we continue to bring these stories and these perspectives into our engagements, which has been really a meaningful experience for our committee, which has, I think in the past has done more reading about these communities or reports from other organizations and not meeting them face to face. And then, thinking about, accountability. How do we think about this? Not just for the companies, but also for investors. How are we accountable to these communities, and what does a good relationship look like? So I think I'll stop there, and thank you very much.
Wow, that's great, Rob. Thanks so much. And thanks to Jay for a great presentation. I mean, I think this is really at the core of the way we want to do this work. So it's really, really helpful to have these different models of how to connect and gather that information and really partner with local groups on these issues. So I just want to encourage everyone to put questions into the Q&A box. We have a few to start with. And I think I'm going to start with a very specific questions of clarification. So Jay, these are really for you. One is, what is a community benefits agreement, and what does a right to work state mean? Like, just to make sure there's level setting in the group.
Of course. So, the right to work states are ones where we don't, the simplest way I can explain is like the ones where we don't have some labor protection. So like public employees can't necessarily take dues out, or public employee unions. It just makes it harder to organize. They traditionally haven't been union states in that sense. So like it's a little bit more difficult to organize in those states, and companies understand this when they move their facilities or move their production plants down. With community benefits agreements, what we're saying is a manufacturer that receives a contract through a public agency should work with the community, which includes faith, labor, workforce development, other interested community advocates on what is the best benefit for this procurement. So what can we come to an agreement on something that's legally enforceable to hold them accountable, so we can go back and check their progress. The examples we gave at BYD and Proterra, as bus manufacturers that have done just that, they've realized that their bottom line has improved. They've trained more workers. They have more capacity to do expanded work. So the CBAs don't just benefit the community. We think that they benefit really the companies as well. But they would be legally enforceable agreements between the community, coalition, and the company.
Great. And you've, in your experience, that's been a way to ensure good jobs, basically. Yes. Good high road jobs. Yeah.
And it's a way to enforce it, to actually have that agreement in place between. So I think just to clarify a little bit my earlier conversation on New Flyer and then creating a community benefits framework, if you just adopt the language, and the way we talk about community benefits, but don't have a legally enforceable or binding agreement with a coalition or the community, then you can say a matter of things that you're doing, but there's no way for us to check, or there's no way for the community to actually respond to that. If not, and I think that's a key distinction between how companies present themselves with ESG principles and how they act in reality at times.
Yeah, that basic assurance is really important, and having a mechanism for doing that. So there's a more sort of basic question, I think. A lot of us, many of the investors on this call have been working on just transition issues, but we've been focused on the energy utility sector. And the question is, how does your engagement with New Flyer relate to just transition in climate change? Like, why should climate advocates be concerned in particular about this? I mean, we're always concerned about high road jobs, but could you just talk a little bit about the connections with the climate issue?
Absolutely. I think there's two components here. One is that when we're looking at forward-thinking policies and taking action on climate, so we're looking at electric vehicles, electrification of city transport, buses. This is an emerging industry, and some of these companies have been working on this for some time. But we have to be careful not to conflate just moving forward on progress on environmental issues with a just transition all around. And I think that's what you highlighted before, that there are different components to this. So I think part of this goal and why we're engaging in this just transition is because our primary focus has been around transit agencies right now, or it's the last in our, since we've started. And we found that the procurement of electric vehicles and buses has already begun through pilot programs. It's going to continue. We know that New Jersey passed a electric vehicle bill in January, last day of session last year, for last session, and moving forward on benchmarks and goals for 2035, 2040, and beyond. New York is looking at the same. California is looking at the same. So while these companies are at the kind of forefront of electric vehicles and clean technology, we have to be able to hold them accountable for this just transition theme, and that means addressing labor community issues. These are multi-million, billion-dollar contracts in some cases. As I mentioned, a group like New Flyer receives over 70% of their revenue from procurement, public contract procurements. So I think, in taking it a further step back, we're entering in the U.S. now administration, which is hopefully a little bit more focused on public transportation. President who has used public transportation understands the need for infrastructure funding, for electrification, for rail and bus priorities. And I think that the companies understand this. New Flyer understands this. Proterra, BYD, all these companies understand electrification and electric vehicles are the way to move forward on climate justice and change. And there's industry in this. And we just have to make sure that as this happens, investors, shareholders, workers, community are standing up saying, okay, but we deserve more with the public dollars.
Great, thanks very much. So there's a question for Rob, actually several questions. And this is a pretty specific one, so I'll ask it first. Can you speak to what data sources you're using when considering developing that social criteria?
Sure. So we are, again, we call our kind of guideline metrics framework. That is, it is populated by three sources. One is the information we get from filings from companies, sustainability reports and other SEC filings and whatnot. The second is information that we get through dialogues with companies, and there's not often too much of that is not publicly available. There may be some timing issues and whatnot. And the third is we currently use Sustainalytics as kind of the third-party research provider to help us populate and evaluate these companies.
Great, thanks very much. So I'll just maybe flip. There's one more question related. This is actually addressed to you, Rob. It looks like the investor benefits from the community interactions to form. It looks like the investor benefits from the community interactions to inform your engagements, but it's less clear that the communities get a direct benefit. Can you talk about that a little bit and how you prevent or avoid artificial expectations? Just what's the agreement you have with the communities when you work with them?
Right. That's a great question, and it is one of the ones that we are most concerned with. It's why do these people care to come listen? Why should they take time and spend resources to talk to us? And for us, the answer is really in those earlier principles that we really feel that we really wanted to prioritize, that we wanted to work with partner with Presbyterians that were already doing this work, that have ongoing long-term relationships. In one case, one Presbyterian pastor had been working with a community in one of the communities in South Louisiana for like over 20 years. So it was really that local Presbyterian pastor on the ground that was kind of making the introduction, saying, I think that you all, the community that she was kind of working with, it was the Ponashian Indian tribe, would benefit from an engagement with this responsible investment committee from the Presbyterian Church, or through a dialogue. So we really kind of really relied on those local connections to help guide us in that. And I don't think we would try to set something up that where there wasn't an ongoing local connection. And now on top of that, we have also tried to stay in touch directly with members of these communities. Like I said, that we've done that throughout 2020 with our community engagement partner in Southwest Detroit, and are going to try to do that more in 2021 with the South Louisiana communities. But so it presents a little bit of a problem, though, about how you do this at a scale. How do you scale this as an investor? If you are, so the question I think is really interesting is, how do you do this the right way so it's mutually beneficial, but also so because we could only, just if we were to do this with, we could spend all of our time working on just one or two communities, on one or two companies, and we just can't, because of our mandate from our church, we can't do that. So we have to figure out how to do this better. But it is the essential challenge, I think.
Yeah, thanks. No, that's a really good point, and I think that's what we've found in previous sort of deep dive engagements with local communities on specific issues with specific companies. Yeah, to do it right, it's very time consuming, which is as it should be, I think, really. So Jay, there's another really interesting question for Jay. Beyond your union example, what are some of the biggest areas of dissonance that you've noticed between public company ESG commitments and on-the-ground realities?
Sorry, could you repeat that last part? It cut out a little bit.
Sure. Yeah, it's beyond your union example. What are some of the biggest areas of dissonance that you've noticed between public company ESG commitments, in other words, what they say on their websites or in their PR, and on the ground realities?
Well, I can speak a little bit more, I guess, anecdotally on this, because I've just been focused primarily on this company in our initial engagement, and so seeing those clear differences in unionized facilities versus non-unionized facilities that were, and what's happening in Alabama. I will say that you generally see a trend towards, as we're thinking about movements like Black Lives Matters, and we're thinking about other racial and social justice movements, I tend to see kind of corporations co-opting a message. And so, and if we even go back to marriage equality, you can co-opt a particular line or kind of messaging, but it's what's the substance behind it. So we never, I guess the general anecdotally, like, we don't see, like, what are the enforceability mechanisms to make sure that it's not just about, for example, in training, that you're not just recruiting or trying to hire more from disadvantaged communities. Like, what is the actual plan? Is it a PR statement? Is it an ability to kind of say, we are looking into these things, we want to, and I feel like that's honestly what's happening with a lot of these companies I'm looking into. Some major corporations, a lot of public corporations, but this idea that we can get more investors by having ESG principles will kind of broaden our ability to attract more investors and shareholders. We'll say the buzzwords, we'll say the right things, but there's very little that goes into what that program looks like without community input. regular that goes in without some kind of enforceability mechanism, some kind of binding agreement, which holds the company accountable. So I guess, and I guess I would frame it as seeing it as very corporate PR messaging versus the reality. So we're for this, we're for that. We want to train our workers. We buy from, products from these communities. It has to go beyond that. It's hard to. I mean, I think one of the things we're undertaking right now is trying to get a better scope of what this looks like for the emerging renewable energy kind of economy. So offshore wind, all of these renewable energy components that'll have industry manufacturing, to get a better understanding. They're all going to be competing for federal money. They're all going to be competing for public money. How do we now kind of get out of this 90s model of manufacturing and declining wages and increased equity challenges, across the spectrum? Like, how do we actually address this? And I think the hopeful news is that I think this next administration, with the work we're doing, with the work Presbyterian Church, everybody on this call is doing, like we're going to be able to have some very serious conversations about accountability and enforceability.
Yeah, and I think just picking up on really an issue both for their workforce issues, but there are also a lot of supply chain issues, and then having clear asks of companies and trying to, so they're benchmarking the social, the E and the S in their supply chains is also really important. We've been working with the Business and Human Rights Resource Center, who put together a sort of resource guide for investors on the supply chain for the renewable energy sector. And, that's really for power production, like, wind turbines and whatnot. But it seems it's a really important issue across the board for the companies that are going to be supplying that, those cleaner products that we need to transition to. And then there's that other question that you raised of, what is it really investors need to be thinking about when we talk to companies about the pledges they make and the words they put out there? What's the reality behind that? How are they, what kinds of targets and metrics are connected with those nice words, with those pledges? And how do we set up a sort of tracking infrastructure, really a benchmarking system for seeing, who's actually producing? Is it effective? What sort of impact is it having? And then, I'd be interested to have you talk a little bit about your work with universities, because you partner with universities to get information from the community about community impacts. And I wonder if you're also looking at the other end of it, like what are the impacts of what the company's committed to do? If they committed to a community benefits agreement, is there a process of research that happens at the other end to see what difference that's made in the community?
Those are great questions, too. I know I see in the comments too that Madeline might be wanted to Madeline's our executive director for Jobs to Move America. I did want to talk a little bit too, just about some of those specific issues in Alabama and kind of racism and racial justice issues. Is there a way to get Madeline on a?
Oh, sure. Can you unmute Madeline Janis, please? Let's see if I can do it. Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. That's great. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Well, this has been so interesting. I think one of the things on the New Flyer situation that Jay he talked about, but to emphasize more in response to the question that was asked about, what does this have to do with climate, and also, what does this have to do with holding an ESG committed company accountable. And so in the New Flyer, in companies like New Flyer that invest in a place like Alabama, and in rural Alabama, and we've done these surveys and we've talked to a lot of workers, and there are a lot of black workers. Most of the black workers in that company complain about serious racism, and being treated differently, no opportunities for promotion, being fired, being singled out, the use of the N-word. I mean, all kinds of things in this factory, and there's nothing that they can do about it. And so the opportunity, and here they are, like they're holding themselves out as this big ESG company, and they're one of the main suppliers of electric buses in North America, and being put forward as the solution to our climate crisis. Well, they may be a solution, but racism in their factories is unacceptable. And so shareholders can do something about that, by standing with these workers to say no to this company. No, you have to actually engage with the company, engage with these workers, and you have to eliminate racism and live your values. Like, don't call yourself an ESG company if you treat people like this, your workers systematically like this. That's the only thing I wanted to add to what Jay was saying.
Oh, thanks, Madeline. That's great, and it puts a lot of color on what Jay was talking about.
Can I one more thing too?
Yeah,
I think this
go ahead.
Other just quality of life, health and safety issues. We're crossing our I's, dotting our crossing our T's, dotting our I's. So and doing our research and talking to workers in the communities in Kentucky, Minneapolis, Alabama, even in the UK. We're in contact now with workers in Scotland who have been affected by New Flyer purchasing Alexander Dennis bus line, telling the workers they're going to be fine, and then the workers finding out during the last earnings call that positions were being eliminated. They weren't told beforehand, they were told during an earnings call. So it's the culture of the company too. So it feeds into this idea that Paul Soberby, the CEO of New Flyer, says everything's going fine, none of these things are true. The workers experiencing racism in the South, and if the CEO doesn't understand what's happening on the ground level, that's a problem, and dismisses what's happening on the ground level, that's a problem. So there are lots of health and safety concerns right now. There's a lot of stuff happening in their Kentucky plant. There's an OSHA letter too. A worker recently lost their finger. There was a whistleblower fired. There's so much happening on a micro level with the culture of the company that then kind of permeates into how managers treat Black and brown workers in the South, how they address worker safety issues in non-unionized facilities. All of it kind of just this only kind of scratches the surface of why we feel this is a problem with a company that receives as many lucrative public contracts as it does.
Yeah, no, it sounds ripe for engagement. So if anyone is interested to, if anyone on this call or in our network holds New Flyer, it would be really terrific to engage the company directly on these issues, because we have so much detailed information from you that we can get in partnership with you. So really appreciated. And we're almost out of time. This has been great, and I really appreciate again your work on these issues and the process and your time today. I want to mention just quickly, we will be having a webinar on offshore wind in early November, so please watch your inboxes for that. I want to end with a quick question, if anybody has any thoughts on this. We have a new administration coming into Washington, and so wondering how we can leverage the Biden administration's focus on environmental justice. Is there a public policy advocacy action here, either directly or through our corporate relationships? So any comments that either of you want to make on that? It's a great question. Rob, do you want to maybe as a investor,
yeah,
have any comments on it?
It's still hard to believe that this is going to be the reality soon. So, yeah, exactly. So yeah, I think there'll be, just a lot of opportunity to push in the right direction. Specifically what that looks like right now, I'm not sure, but I know that we'll be very interested and be, kind of looking for opportunities, and we'll continue to work with our partners and colleagues and to figure out the best way forward. So.
Yeah, and I think ICCR will be as well. All right, thanks again, everybody, so much. And we'll look forward to seeing you all in February. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.